Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well, doing well.
Good.
Ready to fight another battle.
Another battle.
And we look for good news, and we accept bad news because we hope we can change the bad news with the good news. Well, I have found some statistics that have been on the air. So one report, I guess, just came out, a CDC report talking about, sort of agreeing with us more so than ever. And at the same time, the bad news is, as the enemy, and those are the neocon nuts who are one to take the most advantage possible, they must be feeling the heat because they're getting more determined than ever before. They're not going to walk away, without a battle. So that's going on. They're trying to work this up. But I want to talk a little bit about a report. Matter of fact, I saw it this morning on Stuart Varney, and he was interviewing with the doctor, the Fox doctor there, and they had this CDC report. And I was surprised because Stuart is a nice guy, and I've been on his program a lot, and he's easy to get along with, but he hasn't always been jumping up and down about holding back. But this time, I think he was very objective. He saw the evidence, and the doctor talked about it, and it shows that the CDC has come around to accepting tremendous adjustments on the number of people that die from this. Where before, let me see if I can get this, before it was 0.4%. Now it's down. It can be estimated as low as 2%. And if you take away, the numbers that are sort of distorted with nursing homes, you can get it down for general population down to 1% or 1/10%. Yeah. And so this is tremendously different, considering the fact that who are those people at WHO? Well, they were the ones that helped scare the people to death.
Yes.
More people died from their fear mongering.
Bill Gates funds them.
Yeah. And they were saying 3.4%. You say 3-4%, 2%. But this is big difference in I asked you this morning, well, what have you read about who? What are they saying? You said they're pretty quiet.
Pretty quiet, yeah.
They're pretty quiet. They don't have anything to brag about. But I think this is pretty good information that people are coming around, and the numbers are coming along our way about the reduction of the shutdown, even though there are some terrible things happening with that. The way I see it, I think the people who really believe in the shutdown are going to use it and concoct things. Before you know it, they'll have another virus or something. So we really have to win this argument or debate is going on. Of course, the principle is who should be doing what, and should the government be in there regulating drug treatments and medical care and all these things. But at least I think the statistics ought to calm the people down. But you and I have both, we continue to bump into people who remain very frightened. Terrible. And you sort of almost have to feel sorry for them because they bought into it, and they say, well, this is dangerous, people die, and they do, but they die from this one statistic on here from the CDC said that a certain category, like the young kids, they're more likely to get killed by lightning than they are by the coronavirus. So this, I think it's getting out about even this article, which was written by Daniel Horowitz. Yeah. Said that you're not going to see it on news. But, it's getting close if we're on Business Fox trying to tell the truth. And I think we're making inroads, which means the only way we have been able to, and others have been able to have a contrary opinion to the mainstream media, the big guys, has been through the internet. And of course, the internet is not a perfect organization, because if you are too strong in telling the truth, sometimes they lock you out, from saying it. So that is one of my big concerns, always has been. But as long as we're able to put this information out and try to persuade people, because the information is there if people want to seriously study it, but they hear it and they get frightened, and I think that's sad.
There is a mass hysteria, and it's controlling people. Even though statistics increasingly, as you point out, suggest that there really is no real danger. But this, and Daniel Horowitz, he writes for The Blaze. He's done a pretty good job. He's written a couple of pieces, the contrarian pieces, that have actually now that he's been writing for a while, they've come to pass and come true. And he writes about this new CDC report that, as he points out, where is the mainstream media? Well, thankfully, Stewart covered it, but there's not a lot of other coverage because they love the fear. But the report is fascinating. As you point out, they do 5 different scenarios, the CDC does, based on the data that they have now, real data. And the most likely scenario, overall deaths, is 0.26%. The death rate among those symptomatic is 0.4%. There's at least a 35% asymptomatic case rate. We know some people that were in that category. And this now turns out to be just like the Stanford study that we talked about a month ago when they did all that research in Santa Clara and found out that the death rate is far, far lower. So when you look at an overall 0.26% and you compare that with the WHO's claim of 3.4%, it's wildly off. And Trump was yelling and screaming and hollering about he's going to defund the WHO because they were covering up for China. Well, that's just part of politics. Right. The real reason to defund the WHO is they're unbelievably inaccurate. This, and you got to wonder if you pay the piper, you call the tune. Bill Gates is writing multi-billion-dollar checks to them, and he's getting the results he wants. But here's the thing about the CDC, Dr. Paul. It's even less deadly than that. 50% of the deaths have been in nursing homes, as you point out, which is the real tragedy, the untold tragedy of this. But if you factor that out, because it really is an anomaly, something very strange happened there, and they had some help. Non-nursing home deaths, if you factor that out, would be 0.1% or 1 in 1,000, even including those with comorbidities dying. So what does that mean in real point? And David Horowitz does a great job of breaking this down, the CDC's numbers. If you're under 50, you have 1 in 5,000 chance of dying, even if you have symptoms. You have a 1 in 6,275 chance overall. And as you point out, Dr. Paul, to put a fine point on it, children, better chance of getting struck by lightning and killed than to die of this. Yet you still see parents with their children all maxed up in the store. The kids can't even breathe. Horrible.
Can you imagine the change in statistics if they lumped the deaths and counted the deaths from the shutdown into this?
Yeah.
It would be way ahead of the deaths from the virus, because right now we have an epidemic of suicide. We've had people denied medications, and the hospitals have sort of closed down, and people have been denied treatment and denied surgery for weeks on. And we've talked about that. And there's also been denial of medications. The chloroquines. It was difficult to get out of this fear and out of this propaganda that is out there. But if you added all the deaths that are occurring there, these numbers. A logical person would say, the lockdown didn't do any good. It killed more people than the virus was killing, and people will deny that. But the statistics are there, but they're going to be hidden. They're not going to, go in. Matter of fact, some will be difficult because it's sort of they didn't come to the hospital. Yeah, they were terrified about it, and that's why some of these things that they're proposing to do. Continuously now might not erase that fear of getting the care that they want, and because they're going to be fearful of what the government's going to do with all the information they're going to gather and all the spying they're going to do, even though they're pretending that we're going to remove this lockdown.
Yeah, and it's going to come out, and it is coming out. And we talked about it yesterday, how people are resisting, and the numbers are going their way. And we actually have our first clip is literally from the CDC report, so this isn't just us misreading it. If we can put that first clip up, this really speaks volumes, because they're having the numbers in. They basically come up with policy first, then science, And so if we have those numbers over there, we can have a look at what they came up with in their report. It's I guess we don't have those numbers, but. So the CDC, they're running the numbers. It's not coming out like they say, like they claimed. People thankfully aren't dying in the numbers that they claim. So what is the next scenario? What happens? Do they say, okay, well, we give up, we we really fouled this thing up. More people are dying from our, from our attempts to thwart the virus than from the virus itself. They're not doing that. In fact, we have several scenarios we're going to talk about in the rest of the show about how governors are actually ramping things up, even though the numbers are going way down. And hopefully we'll be able to put up some pictures in a minute, but it's just incredible.
Well, as we wait for that, I wanted to talk a little bit, unfortunately, about our governor.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about things made worse by these lockdowns. And he really is a disappointment because it's been in the news, and he's in the news of getting, $295 million contract for tracking and tracing people.
Contact tracing, yeah.
To do this for the benefit of the so-called government, but sometimes it's for the benefit of the corporations and who knows what. But I found it ironic because I haven't found or talked to many people here in Texas that think that's a great issue. A great idea.
Great idea.
And yet it was hinted, at least somebody put it in writing and said this may be his strategy because he had it on his mind that he'll be running for president. Now, if this turns out to be a stepping stone to running and being a reasonable candidate or becoming president, then we're in deep trouble. You become more authoritarian. You're going to be spying on people all the time and terrorizing people. I would say that would be a sad story.
It would be, and the whole thing about the contact tracing is as you say, the numbers in Texas are going way down, and the governor, he's awarded this contract for almost a $300 million contract for contact tracing. An article on Town Hall caught our attention, written by actually Phyllis Schlafly's sons. And they did a good job, and they open it up by saying, this sounds like a dark episode in the history of the communist Soviet Union. It's being promoted by Democratic governors on a massive scale, never accepted in the United States. And then it goes on, it even extends into liberty-conscious conservative Texas. Well, Texas is turning purple, but nevertheless. But the whole idea of this contact tracing, it basically is a public-private partnership, which is the worst of all worlds, where they surveil the citizens, they find out who you've been talking to, where you've been, where you're going, and then they hand all of that data over to the government to follow you, to know everything about your movements. And it's just incredible that Governor Abbott, who, has been pretty bad this whole thing. They say relatively open Texas. They have them come around and put locks on all of our doors. But even with the numbers taking a dive bomb of deaths here in Texas, 25% capacity. You need to wear face masks. You need to stay away from each other. Everyone's going to get you sick. But add this to that, and really this is kind of a dystopian, Orwellian situation where they're monitoring everything we do and handing the data to the state.
And the temptation will be very great for the people being interviewed or checked won't tell the truth about what they're looking for because they want to protect somebody's privacy and they don't want to get involved. And that encourages lying, and also it encourages people spying on their neighbor and reporting people so they're on the side of the government. And I think one reason why people, if they're concerned, they ought to wonder why Soros is such a champion of this program. So this is something that really is going to be a big problem if it goes through. But this is the contract he got it. But once again, our governor did what the other liberal governors do.
Yeah.
No asking of their legislature branch, the legislative body. They didn't give him permission to do that. So hopefully they'll try to reverse this.
Yeah, and think about what it does to the social fabric. If you know that everywhere you move, you're going to be tracked. If you happen to have ever had the COVID, ever had the virus, even if you're completely over it, they know now that once you've gone over it, you can no longer be contagious. And we also know that they're lumping tests in, those with antibodies and those that are actually infected. They're lumping them together. So what does it mean for people? They're going to be afraid to go out, even though you're supposedly allowed to go out. They don't want to contact their relatives because what's going to happen? The government's going to come along and follow up, knock on your door and say, hey, Daniel McAdams showed up and he's got antibodies for this. You got to stay in your house for 14 days. You can't leave. What's that going to do? How's that going to turn people against their neighbors? I can't imagine it working in Texas. I can't imagine it going through. I can't imagine a lot of people knocking on a lot of people's doors and telling them they got to stay home. I hope that my view after living here for 6 years is right of how Texans really are, and working for Texas for maybe 20 years now under your office. But I just can't see how this can work out and how this can go through.
Right. I'm fearful that it still might do it, but we have to be cautious. You know, there was another story on the morning paper which exemplifies this whole problem that we face on the stress levels. You know, the suicides that are going on and the family problems, and people can't being locked down is not the best thing in the world. And this was this little fight that turned up on Squawk Box.
Yeah,
I find that interesting because it was Joe Kernan and Andrew Sorkin. And they've been on the air for a long time. I watch them, I listen to the news, and they go back and forth, but they always appear as, you know, pretty good friends, and they talk to each other. But all of a sudden, they got into a big fight, and yes, there are a lot of disagreements, and there are a lot of not always express them on the air. But I think it's the stress level that finally got to them. And here they were wide apart on the issue of the lockdown, and they really yelled and screamed at each other. But I think that, again, is a reflection not only people who are locked in their houses, because even the people who do TV now, they don't go into their TV studio. They're dealing with people mostly through Skype and Zoom. You know, so the whole thing is different, and everybody walking around there has these masks on. So this is not going to go back to normal for a long, long time, as long as they keep doing this. And our message at the beginning is this: no, the enemy of liberty will use this as a reason to enhance their power. And I mean, they do it through all our policies, whether it's financial problems, whether it's foreign policy or whatever. When there's a problem, when you use it as an excuse, or they use it who want power and believe they are authoritarians and the people are stupid, and we have to they figure they have to take care of everybody, then they go and do this. But I'll tell you what, this is this to me was entertaining, but also a reflection of a stress level in our country. So I don't imagine anybody will get fired over that, because I imagine that 3 or 4 minutes will be more watched than anything else. Well, finally we're hearing them, one person taking one side versus the other. But that's not generally what that station tries to do.
And there is a lot of stress and mental problems. I was reading an article earlier today, and I think the number is right. I could be wrong. But there's been an 80% increase in psychiatrists prescribing psychoactive drugs, antidepressants and all these things. So that's actually even more dangerous, because we know how dangerous those drugs are, but people are so desperate now, and they're feeling so desperate that they're taking these drugs. But the theme of the show is that despite the fact that we have these new CDC numbers, despite the fact that we've showed it a couple times at least, the death rate in the U.S. is going way down. Despite all of these numbers going this way, the tyrants around, and sadly it includes our own governor, but the tyrants around the country are desperately clinging to power. They can't let go. There are a few really, really bad ones, but I think one of the worst is Virginia, because he has locked it down tight. And of course, you have all the people in Northern Virginia who are making a lot of money, working from home, sitting around their slippers, and people in the South have all lost their jobs. But here it is. Unfortunately, we don't have the graphic, but if you look at a graphic on the Virginia death rate today, you can see the usual curve, and here's the bottom, and it's way down here. I mean, it's literally down here to almost no deaths at all in the past couple of days. So what does the great, brilliant governor do? Today, and we got this from Bob Wenzel's Target Liberty, it's a great place to go for this info. Today, he's going to announce mandatory mask wearing in businesses. After it's basically done. And here's the justification. It's a totally sleight of hand. It's a total trick, because the justification for doing this draconian measure is that, we have an increase in cases. Well, why is that? Because you massively increase the testing. If you do massively more testing, you're going to get a few more cases. Some of the headlines, some of the ones that are more hysterical about this, they say, another massive outbreak in Wuhan, the big spike in Wuhan. And then you look beyond the top headline, they tested almost 11 million people, and they got 100 new cases. Massive spike. So this is the trick that they're playing. The real importance, and we have a couple of articles on the Ron Paul Institute website, the real important data is the death rate, full stop. And when you look at the death rate,
Right.
Like all viruses, it's almost done.
And you know, I like to make the point that what they do sometimes does the opposite, and we've made that point quite often. And our governor and other governors have done that, is they've decided that they're doctors and know whether chloroquine is good or bad. I don't even think that should be a political question. I don't think it should be in government. I think it should be a medical question. It should be done between doctor and patient. But that's a little bit too much to expect, because that's what the free society would, a free society would handle this. But the chloroquine, especially in this state, was denied to people that were just getting the infection. And they couldn't have it unless they were critical and put in the hospital. And then it might have had a negative reaction for all we know. But it's well known, the people that are expert in this know that it doesn't help that much when a person gets critical. But it helps a whole lot in the early stages of this. So that, once again, it was very difficult. And here's a drug, in Texas, it was just hard to even get it. And it's very, very inexpensive.
Yeah.
And they do the wrong thing.
They do the wrong thing. Well, I want to close out with a good news story, and unfortunately we don't have the clip of it, but it would have made more impact. But it's something, you know, we told a couple of bad stories about Texas. We got to kind of even things up and make it a little bit easier. Here's something that came out this morning. Kevin Smith, he's a co-owner. You're going to love this name. It's in Elgin, Texas, not too far from here. Elgin, Texas, the Liberty Tree Tavern. And he put up a sign. Basically, he said, "You can't come in if you're wearing a mask. No masks." It's a great little sign he has on there, and it says, let me see if I can read it here. But he talks about basically, if you are so afraid going outside, you've got to put a mask on. Please don't come in here. Stay home until you feel less afraid. Then you can come to our pub. And he says, try to social distance while you're in the pub. But essentially, if you can't bear the thought of going out without a mask on, then the Liberty Tree Tavern is not for you. So go Elgin.
No, the spirit of liberty is still alive here and there. Hopefully it's more alive in the state of Texas than it is in the heart of our governor.
Yeah.
So we'll have to wait and see. But no, I think things are moving in our direction. I think this report from the CDC is helpful to us. I think the fact that WHO isn't speaking out anymore means they know they were wrong. So I think the truth will come out in the end. It's just that if my suspicions are right, in a way I hope I'm wrong, is that more people died from the interference than they did if they just allowed it to happen. So we interfered, and that caused more deaths than what was happening just in a natural way, because the more they study it, the more they figure out it hasn't been that bad, but it has been tremendous in attacking our personal liberties. And I am so confident that in a society that protects liberty can figure these problems out much better. And when you depend on government and government regulation, government funding, and you tend on the corporations, Daniel mentioned that contract for this, following all these people, the tracking and all. It's a corporation that's involved. So unfortunately, when it gets the corporation and government together, you're leaning toward fascism. That's what the whole principle of fascism is. You mix them together. And that to me is a big problem, and that's been happening for a long time. But just think of the bailouts, the financial bailouts. Think of the combination of the so-called private central bank. It has no authorities, and the corporations in the banking system. They're not free market. So this whole idea that we live in a society that protects liberty and that we have a free market economy. And the worst part about this is we have a lot of problems. The interference in the coronavirus deal is a big deal. The foreign policy is a big deal because we always make it worse. And the monetary policy, it's made worse. And so we have this crisis. It's a financial crisis. Unemployment rates are skyrocketing. We're going to have a lot more price inflation. And what happens? All of a sudden, our media gives full coverage and recognition to people who say, I'm a socialist, and we're sick and tired of this freedom we have too much freedom in this country and we need socialism. And believe me, there's a lot of people that feel that way, but we're trying our best to change that attitude, because if that attitude isn't changed and they think this is freedom and that this is free market and sound money and a decent foreign policy, they don't have any understanding or desire for a program that would promote peace and prosperity, which is our goal. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.